believe this summer, when Evan and I were talking back and forth, I was literally able to watch one of his older programs and text with him back and forth, asking questions. This would have never happened because I would have never had the time to do this when I was at work. So, I mean, I was working from home. But anyway, this is what I consider one of the silver linings, having dinner with my family more than once a week. I mean, we have dinner several times a week now. And I really hope that this pandemic does pass, but I hope that we do hold on to some of the quote unquote good things that have come out of it. Like I said, I met Evan through a group of librarians, and we started talking. And originally, the thing that brought me to Evan was all the riots that were taking place in the Chicagoland area. And I don't mean the protests, but I mean the riots. I was really getting concerned, and I wanted someone to be able to speak about social justice. And so we talked about a whole bunch of different subjects, and we thought that coming up with the sports and politics, bring in the Title IX, and some of the things that have been happening now, such as the gentleman, the first football player who put a knee down and did not want to stand during the, gosh, help me out here.
Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah, Colin Kaepernick. And I thought that these were very important. I mean, sports is a huge part of everyday life, not for everybody and not every sport for everybody, but it fills our TVs, it fills our stadiums, it fills people's social talk. And there were a lot of changes that were going on. So Evan and I started talking, and Evan said, I have this program. It's called the Three-Legged Stool. It's about sports and politics. So I thought, all right, here we are. Let's go. So I am very much looking forward to this program too. Yeah, you're right. Zoom. Rich says that he doesn't know he didn't know what Zoom was until March. Well, there is, oh my goodness gracious. Well, we are so grateful to have you here tonight. And let me tell you that this is very good social distancing here. So
I have lost you. I have lost you.
You're still on the screen. You're still on the screen.
I'm still on the screen. Okay.
Okay. So what I am going to do at this point is I am going to mute and turn off my video. So the only person that will be on the screen is Evan and his program. And then we will move on from there. And Evan, I'm going to pass this off to you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Leona, for inviting me. And thank you to the library, Brookfield Library. And thank you to the people in the Chicagoland area who have come to this tonight or will be watching this on YouTube or whatever other social platform that this will be available. My name is Evan Weiner. I have been doing this type of thing since the age of 15, 1971, when I was in Rockland County in 11th grade at Spring Valley High School, and I got onto a high school show by the name of Tiger Talk. Worst show ever, but it opened the door for me. And I also was doing newspaper work as well at the age of 15. This is the first time I have spoken on land in Chicago. 3 years ago, I did a Great Lakes cruise where I did some speaking on the cruise, and it was outside of Chicago on our way up to Michigan. So technically, I guess it's the second time I've spoken there, but I have some Chicago connections. I knew Ron Santo, as well as Mike Ditka. I had breakfast at his place one day with him, and he yelled at the waiter to make sure, the waitress, to make sure that I had the proper service. I worked with Harry Carey as well. And I have one story here about the Drake Hotel, and that guy in the middle is John Madden. And you might remember John Madden, Pat Summerall and John Madden doing the most important NFL or NFC game of the week and doing Super Bowls and all. I worked with John on his radio show for about 15 years. And that's a picture of me. I'm on John's right, your left, John and Dennis Steele, who is the producer of the show. And John used to have the bus, and he would ride around the bus, and he would have various people riding with him, riding shotgun with him. Some years it would be his son, Joe. When he started, it was a guy by the name of Michael Frank. And Michael said to me one day, "Hey, did you ever hear the story about Madden in the Drake Hotel?" And I said, "No, tell me about the story." So this is Michael Frank, who was his assistant at the time in the late 1980s. He said, "Yeah, we get into the Drake Hotel, we check into the hotel, and we get into the elevator, and there's this guy, a long-haired guy, skinny little guy with an English accent. And he's looking at John, and he says, 'Mr. Madden, Mr. Madden, Mr. Madden, may I shake your hand?' He said, 'You know, I'm an English guy, and I don't know much about football. In fact, I know nothing about American football, but I've been watching you, and I feel I've learned a lot from American football. I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't know how much I enjoy you.'" He gets off the elevator. John turns, or Madden, we never call him John, it was Madden. Madden turns to Michael Frank. He says, "Who was that guy?" He said, "You know who it is?" He said, "Yeah, it's Mick Jagger." He said, "Who?" "It's Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger, you know? Satisfaction, I ain't got no satisfaction. I don't get no satisfaction." And John turns to Michael and says, "He looks like he don't get no satisfaction." The Drake Hotel in Chicago. The politics of sports business is something that I have been doing since 1982, covering the National Football League strike. That was one of my first scoops in my career when Gene Upshaw, who was with the National Football League Players Association, went to the men's room with me at the Sheraton Hotel on 7th Avenue and 54th Street. I'm covering the negotiations, and we go into the bathroom together. And you know, he looks at me, we're side by side, and he looks at me and he says, "It's over." I said, "What's over?" He said, "The strike's over." I said, "Oh, good." He said, "Can I tell that to the world?" He said, "Yeah." So I went over, washed my hands, went to the telephone. I was doing something for WTIC radio at the time with Arnold Dean in Hartford, 1080 on the dial. I said, "It's over." And he said, "What's over?" I said, "The strike is over." So that was my scoop. So I've been covering the politics of sports business for a very long time. In 1983, the NBA and its Players Association came up with a landmark agreement which included a salary cap and drug testing. 1984 was an Olympic year, so nothing really happened. 1985, there was a two-day baseball strike. 1986, whereas I got my real education on all this, covering the United States Football League, National Football League antitrust trial, which the NFL lost, but won because the USFL's attorney, Harvey Meyerson, failed to get the jury to understand that there was a monetary part to this thing too, and the jury gave the USFL a buck. In 1987, there was another football strike. In 1988-89, after Reagan signed the tax reform bill into law in 1986, it left a huge gaping hole that allowed owners to get what they literally wanted from municipalities. 1990, there was a baseball lockout. 1991, National Hockey League strike. 94 as well. So I have learned from the best. And some of the best, that guy there who's on the cover of one of my ebooks, David Stern. And David Stern, we didn't get along necessarily all the time, but David took me aside an awful lot of times and explained how sports operated in the United States, a three-legged stool. You need government support, you need television, and you need corporate support. And I'm going to talk about all of that as we go on with the politics of sports business, the Stern years, 1984 to 2014, the 30 years that he was the commissioner of the National Basketball Association. Now, the Stern three-legged stool was interrupted this year by two things, social protests and also COVID-19. And the COVID-19 is ongoing. For instance, today, the Boston Marathon organizers announced that there will not be a Patriots Day Boston Marathon in 2021 because of the pandemic. They're hoping that they could do it in the fall of 2021. In the American Hockey League, and you got the American Hockey League team, the Chicago Wolves in town, they may not start until February the 5th of 2021. They had been targeting December 1st. And of course, Black Lives Matter got heavily involved in the sports world this year with the National Basketball Association. Players, highly political this time around, and also continuing to be very political and speaking out about the presidential election of 2020. And of course, that is George Floyd, one of the protests after he was killed by a Minneapolis policeman who put his knee on his neck for about 9 minutes. The National Football League, the stodgy old National Football League, stodgy and old, and that's Roger Goodell, who lives less than a mile from me, the commissioner of the National Football League. And the National Football League has had problems with social protests since 2016, when Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the national anthem, playing the national anthem. And it was the third time that he did that in 2016 in a preseason game that a sports writer noticed it and brought it up. He did it twice before, and nobody saw it, or nobody thought to talk to Colin Kaepernick about it if they did.
Evan, I'm going to interrupt for just a second. Are you supposed to be sharing a screen right now?
I think I'm supposed to be.
Because we see your lovely face, but we're not seeing any slides.
Oh, okay. How about now?
There we go. Okay.
Okay, you got the slides. I don't know what happened
Okay.
there.
But
yeah, the only thing we'll just recap it just very quickly here. What you missed on the slides was me and Madden in 1997. My book, David Stern, The Stern Years, 1984 through 2014, the Black Lives Matters protest, and Roger Goodell, who, like I said, lives about a mile from me. The NFL had been facing problems with Kaepernick for 4 years. Kaepernick was blackballed from the NFL after 2016. Although the NFL would never admit it, one owner, John Mara of the New York Giants, said that if he hired Colin Kaepernick, he wasn't sure how his fan base would react. He had Eli Manning as a quarterback, so he didn't really need him at the time. And that's the closest that any NFL owner ever came to admitting that Colin Kaepernick was blacklisted. There was corporate pressure put on Daniel Snyder, the owner of the Washington team, to change his name of Washington Redskins. It's the Washington football team this year. The NFL in June said that they might, the opening weekend of the season, play the Black National Anthem, lift every voice and sing. They did. Roger Goodell did talk about how Black Lives Matter, and Roger Goodell also said that players should speak out, which is totally different from anything that the NFL has done in the past. Football players were expected, put on their pads, go out and play, and shut up, as Jim Burke told me way back when in 1987. During the end of the collapse of the National Football League Players Association. Hey, we're just shutting up and they're just going to beat on us, but we're playing football again. In the NBA, that's Adam Silver, who is the commissioner of the NBA. And Adam Silver said to his players, and he did so in 2014 in the Donald Sterling incident, with the Los Angeles Clippers, after Donald told his mistress, "Why are you hanging around Black players?" And the Los Angeles Clippers players said they were going to revolt and they weren't going to play in the playoffs unless Donald Sterling was removed. The NBA sat on their hands for a couple of days, and the advertisers came down on, the marketing partners came down on Silver, and all of a sudden Donald Sterling was kicked out of the league, even though he had a 30-year reputation of being a racist. So players could speak out. Slogans on the back of NBA jerseys, as you might have seen. And also, players will be active and continue to be active. LeBron James right now is trying to get as many voters out there to vote, or as many people out there to vote, along with some other people. So, Black Lives Matter, according to Adam Silver, slogans on jerseys, players will be active. Other leagues, there is some discussion about the Cleveland Indians and whether or not the Indians' name should be retired. Last year, the Indians retired Chief Wahoo, their logo from the 1940s, although you could still, in Cleveland, get some Chief Wahoo memorabilia. The Canadian Football League's Edmonton Eskimos ditched their name. They will have a new name in 2021. And the National Hockey League has set up a diversity group. Brave new world out there. COVID-19 taking place same time as the protests. The Australian Olympic team medical director, a guy by the name of David Hughes, talking about the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. The Olympics was postponed this year. My advice is, in terms of planning for the Paralympics and Olympics next year in Tokyo, we need to make an assumption that there will not be a vaccine. And that means it will not be business as usual, and it will be a very different looking Olympics from what has been before. I do commentaries on a daily basis called The Politics of Sports Business. And today is Wednesday, so my Friday commentary is about the International Olympic Committee and the president of the IOC, Thomas Bach, who says he thinks everybody's going to show up at the Olympics, all 203, 204 national committees. And he says, listen, why should athletes be punished if they've done the right thing and they've stayed away from the virus and they're doing all the protocols? But the International Olympic Committee, which is a committee that thinks it's a sovereign nation, they have not discussed this with the Japanese scientists as to whether or not they can really hold an Olympics in 2021. So how sports operated? Well, that is me in the year 2007, August 2007. And your taxpayers' dollars at work here, your taxpayers' dollars at work. This was a State Department job for me. Condoleezza Rice approved me. And Robert Gates, who had become the Secretary of Defense, was running Texas A&M University at the time. And he also approved me. I was vetted by the State Department. And I was allowed to talk to 20 people, 20 selected people about how sports operated in the United States. 4 Americans, 1 Canadian. And I said to the Canadian, you know, what are you? You're not really an American, but you might as well be for my purposes, because we had 3 Venezuelans, 3 Indonesians, 3 Turks, 3 Nigerians, and 3 Russian women who were the most difficult in terms of asking all sorts of questions about me and how it operates. And it was basically an hour-and-a-half talk, and it's up on YouTube if you want to see that talk from 2007 with me and the 16 foreign nationals. 15 foreign nationals, 1 Canadian, 4 Americans. And how it operated prior to the pandemic, prior to the social protests this summer. And it operated, as David Stern said, and I have a very high regard for David, and David banged this into me: government, cable TV, and corporate support. And David sat me down one day for about 2.5 hours and explained government. What does government do? Well, in Chicago, as you know, with Jerry Reinsdorf and then Eddie Einhorn with the White Sox, they got money from the Illinois legislature to build the new park on the south side of Chicago. They threatened to move the team to St. Petersburg. There are all kind of tax breaks and incentives that have gone to the people who own the Chicago Cubs. Reinsdorf owned the, or Reinsdorf and Works built the arena that the Blackhawks and the Bulls play in. Soldier Field was rebuilt with government money for the Chicago Bears. So government supplies money, and if not money, it's incentives, it's tax breaks in the National Hockey League and the National Basketball Association. Nobody, none of the owners, and you could go through all of the owners in the NBA in the United States, that's 29, 23 in the National Hockey League, 52 different businesses, none of them pay any property taxes. In fact, Madison Square Garden in New York, right in the middle of Manhattan, should be paying at least $18 million a year in property taxes. They don't. Now, that brings up a problem for the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers in neutral site games. They have to be the road team because in the agreement which Ed Koch and Mario Cuomo signed off on back in 1982, it says the Rangers and Knicks must play every game at Madison Square Garden, or they lose that tax exemption, and that tax exemption is a big exemption. The government also created a major revenue stream in 1984 when Ronald Reagan signed the Cable TV Act of 1984, and there were also deductions for companies to buy big ticket suites, club suites at sports events. All that starts in Milwaukee, about 90 miles north of you, with County Stadium being built and opened in 1953. The people in Milwaukee in 1950, the city council wanted to get a Major League Baseball team in town. They had two options, the Boston Braves and the St. Louis Browns. But they didn't have a stadium, and they needed a new stadium. They needed the stadium because your arch rivals in Chicago, who really aren't your arch rivals, you're actually business partners, the Green Bay Packers franchise needed a new place to play in Milwaukee because the old stadium was battered and beaten. In 1949, the Milwaukee elected officials put aside funds for a new baseball park and football park. Would seat 28,000 people. They could bump up the capacity to 36,000 people. In 1950, construction started on Milwaukee County Stadium. That ballpark would be used in an attempt to land a Major League Baseball team. No baseball team had moved since 1903, and it was the first ever publicly funded baseball park. Now, the Los Angeles Coliseum did use public money. They wanted to build the Coliseum for an Olympics. They got the 1932 Olympics. And because that money was used, public money was used in Los Angeles, talk about government. When the Cleveland Rams decided to move from Cleveland to Los Angeles in 1946, the LA Coliseum Commission told Daniel Reeves, the owner of the Rams, you can come here, but you have to hire Negro players. We built this place with public money. The National Football League had an informal ban on Negro players from 1933 to 1945. National Football League wasn't happy with the Los Angeles pressure, but would acquiesce, and Reeves was able to move to Los Angeles, and he signed Kenny Washington and Woody Strode. Strode, you might remember, was an actor. One of his parts was in Spartacus with Bernie Schwartz, rather Tony Curtis. The Milwaukee government changed all the rules, and was good for me because it gave me a career. For stadium and arena funding, it signaled the start of competition between cities for sports franchises. Cities now put up money for venues. That was unheard of before 1950. 1986, Dick Gephardt and Ronald Reagan signed. Gephardt, a Democratic congressman from Missouri, and Reagan, of course, a Republican, signed by the bipartisan 1986 tax code revision. And that helped the owners and the players. If a municipality wanted a team, they could offer a team owner a stadium in their arena, and under the right set of circumstances. And this happened in Cincinnati and other places. The owner could walk out with 92% of the venue revenue, which meant 92% of the ticket sales, 92% of the signage around the stadium, 92% of the parking lot receipts. And teams are now multi-businesses. The Chicago White Sox, the Chicago Bulls, the Chicago Blackhawks are partners together in the TV business. The Cubs with Marquee, they too have their own TV network. So these teams are multi-businesses. Some are in the real estate business, like the Boston Red Sox. Reagan left an enormous impact on sports. I interviewed Reagan in 1980 when he was candidate before he caught fire for WNEW radio. I was 23 years old when I was talking to Reagan, and he was telling me about recreating Chicago Cubs games on WHO radio in 1938 in Des Moines, Iowa. Reagan left an enormous impact on sports by putting his signature on the Tax Reform Act of 1986. That opened a loophole in tax laws and gave owners ammunition in their battles with cities and stadiums, states rather, to get new stadiums, including Chicago with Reinsdorf and Eddie Einhorn. The law gave municipalities a federal tax exemption on bonds to build new stadiums. The change spurred there was a tremendous change in the sports industry. Owners were able to get new buildings with all sorts of revenue generating opportunities, luxury boxes, club seats, higher prices for tickets, for parking, for concessions, and also in-venue restaurants. And cities decided to compete for teams. After Hurricane Katrina hit in New Orleans, I had a friend who was part of a commission in New Orleans, and he was telling me that getting Katrina up and going was a problem because they were competing with Memphis. Memphis had an NBA team. They were competing with places like San Antonio, similar cities. And New Orleans is a party city, but they were worried after Katrina that they weren't going to get people back, partially because cities bent over backwards like Memphis and San Antonio and Orlando to get major league teams. They were major league cities, and New Orleans was worried after Katrina they weren't going to be a major league city anymore. The political involvement is substantial. There is Andrew Cuomo, who is the governor of New York. Next to him, Billy Joel, Cal Cutterback of the New York Islanders, and the former New York Islanders Captain John Tavares. At the announcement that New York State, one of New York State's divisions in charge of business, was able to cut a deal with the New York Islanders owners, who, by the way, John Ledecky and Scott Malkin are big contributors to Andrew Cuomo, along with the other partners who happen to be Sterling Enterprises, owners of the New York Mets, who were involved in this, and Madison Square Garden was involved in this as well, big donors to Andrew Cuomo. They were able to win the bid to develop arena at Belmont Racetrack. Never underestimate politicians and their relationships with owners. Right now in Santa Clara, California, the owner of the San Francisco 49ers, Jed York, wants to get people out of office who have hindered the 49ers business in some way in the new stadium. So he's donating a lot of money to change the city council or the county executive or the county board in Santa Clara County so he can get his way. The Supreme Court of the United States, that's Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was with the Supreme Court in 1922, not to be confused with Eddie Albert's character on Green Acres, Oliver Wendell Douglas. In 1922, he got it wrong. Baseball got monopoly powers. They got permission from the Supreme Court to act like a monopoly. 1922 decision in the Federal Baseball Club of Baltimore versus the National League. The court ruled against the Terrapin owners. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "The personal effort not related to production is not subject to commerce, and therefore baseball wasn't subject to federal regulation. In layman's terms, baseball was a game, not a business, even though the Brooklyn, New York Dodgers might travel out to Pittsburgh and play the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania Pirates, or the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania Pirates might play the Chicago, Illinois Cubs. It was a game. It wasn't a business, even though it was an interstate business. Baseball got monopoly powers. And the Terrapin decision came out of the Federal League, which was in existence in 1914 and 1915. Chicago Whales were part of that league. And everybody got paid off in the Federal League except the Baltimore people, and they got upset, so they sued, looking to get some money. Out of the Federal League, you got Wrigley Field. because that was built for the Chicago Whales. Gerald Ford, the President of the United States in 1976, 74 actually, August 9th, 1974 through January 20th, 1977, college football player at University of Michigan. And during his term in 1976, because the NCAA believes in something called principle and amateurism. They don't. The National Collegiate Athletic Association is a business. But anyway, the NCAA looks after athletes by keeping them away from the temptation of professionalism and commercialism, and looks after the best interests of student athletes. Northwestern is playing, University of Michigan's playing, Michigan State, Illinois, all playing in the Big Ten. Not sure it's in the best interest of the student athletes to play during a pandemic. I guess Washington has lost its quarterback, or may lose its quarterback, to COVID. The group got a special tax-exempt status as a charitable organization under the IRS code, as well as Congress, and Ford signed that into law. Now, what does this mean? Well, let's say Northwestern goes to the Rose Bowl. All of the revenues that they take in from the Rose Bowl, they don't have to pay taxes on, nor does the Big Ten. That's just one example. Nice work if you could get it. Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson in 1966 created the Super Bowl with a signature on November 8th, 1966. He signed the bill that would ultimately create the Super Bowl. Much of the legwork would come from a Brooklyn congressman by the name of Emanuel Seller, who I think was first elected during the War of 1812, and two Louisiana politicians, the Senator Russell Long, the fifth most powerful Democrat in 1966, and Cokie Roberts' father, the Congressman Hal Boggs. The Super Bowl came out of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and you might ask me, how's that possible? Well, I will tell you how it's possible. 1965, American Football League was going to put an all-star game in New Orleans. 22 African-American football players boycotted that game. Why? Because of Jim Crow. And, okay, thank you, Kent. The game has been canceled now. The Super Bowl roots. 22 African-American players boycotted that game, and it sets off a series of events which would conclude with the first ever championship game between the American Football League and the National Football League almost 2 years later. Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act into law on July 7th, 1964. The African-American players encountered all sorts of problems when they got to New Orleans. I have a friend by the name of Abner Haynes. Abner played in the American Football League between 1960 and 1967. He was Joe Namath's roommate with the Jets in 1967. Abner is about 83, 84 years old now. He is down in Dallas. He was the first African-American player to play regularly college football in Texas at North Texas University back in 1956. He's there, and he's told by his owner, Lamar Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs, Abner, when you go to New Orleans, name, rank, and serial number. That's it. Abner Haynes, running back, Kansas City Chiefs, a member of the American Football League All-Star team. The 22 African-American players do fly to New Orleans, and they get to the airport, and they found out immediately, hey, there are no cabs for you. Oh yeah, there was a cab for Cookie Gilchrist because Jack Kemp, who ran for vice president in 1996, with Robert Dolan, once told me, I ran in the absolute worst way. I lost. I had a 30-year relationship with Jack Kemp. Jack came in with Cookie Gilchrist, and Cookie was able to get into a cab because under Jim Crow rules in New Orleans, if a colored player or a colored man or woman wanted a cab ride, if he had a white person with him or her, they could get a cab ride. So a lot of players never did get a cab ride into New Orleans. Jack Kemp is wondering, where are my teammates, along with Cookie Gilchrist? And eventually they would call the Lamar Hunt and Bud Adams, the owner of the Houston Oilers, and say, where are our teammates? They call the governor of Louisiana. and the mayor of New Orleans, because this was going to be a New Orleans coming out party. They were going to get a football team. The government was all for it. Dave Dixon, who founded the United States Football League, was one of the guys who pushed for this as well. Eventually, there was some negotiations. They sent the cabs out to the airport, and the colored cabs, they were there, as Bobby Bell would say. They go to the Fontainebleau Hotel in New Orleans, in the Hotel Roosevelt, and the players start trading stories. Ernie Ladd, who's 6'9", weighs 315 pounds, plays with the San Diego Chargers. He goes along with Earl Faison. They go to a bar on Bourbon Street. One of the bouncers says, I wouldn't go in there if I were you. And Ernie Ladd, who went to Grambling University in Louisiana, says, I'm going in. I wouldn't go in there. And all of a sudden, the guy got a whole bunch of courage. He pulled the gun on Ernie Ladd and Earl Faison went back. Abner told me a story. There was Cookie Gilchrist, who leads the boycott. The game would move to Houston. Abner told me a story that he and David Grayson get to the Hotel Roosevelt, and they check in. They're fine. They go to the elevator, and there's an old woman sitting on the stool in the elevator, and they got one of these crank elevators that you cranked up, and you move the fence. And she looks up and she says, what are you two monkeys doing here? And both Abner and David gave name, rank, and serial numbers. Said, okay, get in the back, monkeys. So the players decided to meet on that, and they said, we're not playing. Jack Kemp had their back, and the game was moved to New Orleans, from New Orleans to Houston. The AFL never put a team in New Orleans, but here it's kicked into Congress. When the AFL and the NFL announced the merger on June 8th, 1966, New Orleans became a political football. Merger was needed, and it needed congressional approval, and there were two roadblocks. Long and Hal Boggs, who were two powerful players in the two chambers, and they said to Pete Rozelle, Pete, where's our team? And Pete said, well, we have 24 teams. There are not enough players for more teams. And I feel your pain. And Russell Long and Hal Boggs said, well, we feel your pain too. You're not getting the vote. And there is me and Pete in 1986 at the USFL NFL draft. Pete had just told me something that was pretty funny, apparently. I don't remember it, but there I am in Fortune magazine with Pete Rozelle in 1986. The two say, the merger, how does it benefit New Orleans? So there would be some give and take. Rozelle would trade a franchise for the two votes and other votes in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Eastern Texas, and Arkansas. And there was some political maneuvering by Emmanuel Seller of Brooklyn because the NFL wanted to move Joe Namath and the Jets to LA. LA, Daniel Reeves down to San Diego. Barron Hilton would move to New Orleans because he had business interests there. And the Oakland Raiders would go up to either Portland or Seattle. Seller said, not so fast. He's in Brooklyn, a lot of Jets fans in Brooklyn. And Seller said that this is not going to work. Besides, I did you a big favor in 1961, the Sports Broadcast Act of 1961, which gave the NFL monopoly powers in dealing with TV, and they got money from CBS for TV. And Seller said, I did you a solid in 1961. I will take that away. And Rozelle said, don't worry about it. We're just going to put a team in New Orleans. The NFL AFL Championship game in Los Angeles, January 15th, 1967. Green Bay beats Kansas City 35-10. The Los Angeles Coliseum is 1/3 empty. The game was not known as the Super Bowl. That would come in 1969. Now, I talked about Emmanuel Seller in television. And John Kennedy, there are a couple lasting things from the Kennedy administration that's impact the NFL to this day. One is the Sports Broadcast Act of 1961, which created a massive revenue stream for sports owners from television, signing the Sports Broadcast Act on September 30th. Kennedy was not responsible for the legislation. It was Emmanuel Seller who did it. He gets no credit for it today. But the Seller bill allowed the National Football League to market its broadcast rights as a league package, evenly spreading the broadcast revenues among the then 14 franchises in guaranteeing each team substantial annual revenues, which meant Green Bay was on the same financial footing as the New York Giants, the Chicago Bears, and the Los Angeles Rams for TV. And there is Emmanuel Seller. I wasn't kidding. He was first elected in 1812 or so. The act would change sports. It would apply to the National Basketball Association, National Hockey League, and other sports. Major League Baseball had an antitrust exemption, so it would not apply to them. But because the American National Leagues could sell the product as one-to-TV networks. TV made the American Football League. David Sarnoff gave the struggling American Football League a 5-year deal in 1964 for 65 through 69. Each team would get $7 million over that. No, each team would get less than $7 million, $35 million. $7 million a year. Each team would get about $1 million. With that, Sonny Werblin was able to sign Joe Namath to a $400,000 contract in 1965. The American Basketball Association and the World Hockey Association never got TV deals. The World Football League had Chicago's Eddie Einhorn's Ad Hoc Network in 1974. That was a miserable failure because the WFL owners did not have money. The United States Football League, Chicago had the team in both the WFL and the USFL, overspent for players in 1983. They did have TV deals with ABC and ESPN, but that was before the Reagan lifeline to cable TV in 1984. So ESPN didn't have that much money. Had the USFL hung on, and if Donald Trump had been talked out of moving the USFL to the fall, they would have gotten a big TV contract in 1987 from ESPN. Richard Nixon wanted to watch TV. 1972, he wanted to watch Washington play Green Bay. 1950, the NFL commissioner, Burt Bell, told his owners to black out home games, have people buy tickets for home games. In Chicago in the 1950s, there were hardly any NFL games on because CBS had the rights to the Chicago Cardinals and also the Chicago Bears. Eventually, the Cardinals would farm out two games, whether it would be to Minneapolis or to Buffalo, because they were able to get some NFL games into Chicago, along with Bears games. And in fact, it would be TV that would push the Cardinals to St. Louis. Bell's plea to his owners came after the Los Angeles Rams ownership saw a 50% drop in attendance in 1949 compared to 48. After the Rams signed a deal with the Admiral Television Company in Southern California. The deal was people would want to watch the Rams, we'll buy all the TVs, or they'll buy all the TVs, we'll pay the Rams money. It kind of worked out there, but the Rams saw a major drop in attendance. And you got a football card with every TV that you bought. By 1951, the NFL was in the courtroom defending that blackout policy. In 1953, the Philadelphia judge, Alan Grimm, upheld the league's blackout policy, saying it was not a violation of antitrust laws. The problem would surface again in 1957 in Kent's hometown of Detroit. The Lions would be playing the San Francisco 49ers, but that game was blacked out despite being a sellout. And that would kind of percolate for 15 years. And then I knew Dick Nixon. He had a problem. Dick Nixon, who I met in 1985 and had something of a relationship with for about 3 years, because he came back into prominence settling the umpires dispute in Major League Baseball. And there's Dick. And in the middle of that picture, or to his left, is George Allen. And also Marv Levy is there. Marv Levy, the only football coach who graduated with a degree in English literature from Harvard University. I know Marv. Marv's a sweetheart. George Allen never forgot a name, and he was with the Chicago Bears as well as the defensive coordinator and left to go to Washington. Nixon was upset. He couldn't watch Washington and Green Bay, so he calls his Attorney General down and meets with him about 5 days before the game in 1972, Richard Kleindienst, And he says, do something. Well, it wasn't that easy to do something. But a compromise was eventually reached 72 hours before a kickoff. If the game was sold out, it had to be on TV. Nixon would sign the blackout law. Now imagine this. Dick Nixon wants to sit in his underwear and watch a football game from a room off of the Oval Office. Most powerful guy on earth, and he cannot get a football game on TV in Washington because of this law. Of course, he could have gone up to Camp David, or he could have gone out to California and watched the game, but he didn't want to leave the White House. So he gets the law done. The law would expire in 1975, but they would just carry it on and still carry it on. Reagan, 1984, the Cable TV Act of 1984 socializes cable TV. To this day, you cannot get an itemized bill on your cable or satellite or phone bill of what you were actually paying. So you don't know you're paying $7.50 a month for the various ESPNs, or probably about $4 a month for Marquee in Chicago, or the Comcast network, probably about $3 or $4 a month. You probably don't know that because you can't see it in front of you. What Reagan did was socialize cable TV. So for those who wanted everything on the basic expanded tier, you had to take all or nothing at all, like the Frank Sinatra song. Back in 1984, there was the basic, which was local stations, and the basic expanded tier. Basic expanded tier saved CNN, the Weather Channel, and ESPN from oblivion. The law allowed cable operators to bundle what were financially faltering networks into the basic expanded tier, probably saved the cable TV industry, as consumers were now paying one flat price for numerous stations on basic expanded. The bundling of channels would lead to the formation of regional cable sports TV networks around the United States. And that may be a problem now because of COVID-19, because of the cord cutting. Sinclair, which bought out the Fox sports networks, is hemorrhaging money after paying a lot of money for those networks, and they're cutting back wherever they can. But it did strengthen ESPN, CNN, and other Turner properties, Ted Turner properties, and other cable TV networks. So it's all or nothing at all. Sports operators started getting money from cable TV at that point. My friend Jim Williams, who has won 7 Emmys and 2 ACE Awards, who sometimes comes on these talks with me, he was talking about, he actually worked for the Midwest sports networks in the 80s. He said the real revolution for the NBA came during the 1980s, 1990s, when cable penetration in the large cities grew, which allowed regional networks to grow. Cities like Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, Cleveland, and Phoenix, to name a few, had become wired, allowing the regional cable networks to become a force. And they were home sports entertainment in Houston and Dallas and San Antonio, and the Sunshine Network and the Sports Channel Florida, Sports Channel Ohio, Home Team Sports in Washington, Cox Cable in Phoenix. They had subscriber base. The NBA owners saw it, did the deal. The games came off over-the-air TV, migrated to cable because the sky was the limit. And they could get all kind of money. And in fact, there was a problem in Chicago at this time with the Bulls on WGN and Michael Jordan. And the other owners said that because Michael had become so big that they didn't want WGN, which was a national network at that point. They didn't want the competition. They wanted the local teams watched, not Michael Jordan. And eventually, David Stern would have to cut a deal with the Bulls to limit Chicago Bulls games on WGN nationally to 25 a year. So it went from over-the-air TV to cable. There is a reason that the Disney-owned ABC TV network doesn't put conference finals in non-COVID years in prime time during May sweeps. They just don't get high enough ratings to justify the programming, which sets advertising rates for future years. Networks go after the National Football League contract so they could have the Super Bowl every February because that's the #1 show. Oscars are usually in February, along with the Grammys. That's not going to happen this year. The Grammys have moved back and the Oscars have moved to April. So whoever has the Super Bowl this year, if there is a Super Bowl, and right now the NFL is planning to have a Super Bowl in Tampa with 20% seating capacity. Whoever has that program wins the sweeps, able to set higher ad rates starting in March. It's all about business and eyeballs. The most expensive items on your bill, ESPN. Now, the mad dash to keep TV cash in COVID-19. The National Basketball Association management, led by the commissioner Adam Silver, wanted to get the players back on the court despite the COVID-19 spread, because there were television dollars to be made, and they started looking at a sterile situation in Orlando, at the Disney campus in Lake Buena Vista, or Las Vegas. Eventually, they would settle on Orlando. The National Hockey League would settle on bubbles in Toronto and up in Edmonton, so they could get their Stanley Cup playoffs in. The NHL and the NBA were able to salvage the playoffs and get television money, because there's a significant amount of money that's paid for the playoffs from television, and they got through this year. What happens in 2020, 2021? Great unknown. American Hockey League is sort of thrown in the towel from the 2020 version. The NBA claims it wants to start around December 22nd. COVID, of course, is spreading and spreading significantly around the United States, and they're not going to put their players in a bubble. So the NHL and the NBA have no idea. In fact, none of them have any idea what happens after COVID. A lot of people have cut the cable cord. Can they make up money through Apple TV or maybe Netflix or something else, although Netflix doesn't want to go into the sports business. But the dash for cash from TV, a significant factor in the attempt to get Major League Baseball to go through a season, which it did, National Football League, the Big Ten to get going along with the other college football conferences. Yesterday or 2 days ago, ESPN pulled the plug on what they wanted to do was take the college tournaments that they own in November and December and put them in that bubble in Orlando, and with COVID procedures, players becoming cannon fodder, literally, and just playing so colleges could make money from TV. And that's what it's all about now. You're not going to get much revenues for people in the stands. You are going to get your marketing partners and your TV money. And that's what it's all about right now. When did fans become customers? Well, this guy will tell you. That's John Nash. And John Nash and I in 2000 sat in the New Jersey Meadowlands and talked about it. He was the general manager of the New Jersey Nets at the time. And he was not happy that fans were being forced out and replaced by corporate dollars. But that's how the sports business was going globally at that time. New stadiums, new arenas mean higher ticket prices. And John Nash, who was with New Jersey at the time, said that that's just how it is. We need corporate cash. We can't depend on fans' cash. And as Mark Cuban told me, he said, fans are nickel and dime people. The corporate people, they come in, they buy the big seats, they eat in the restaurants, they buy merchandise, they use valet parking. That's a lot of revenue stream. Fans, and Mark wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Mark and I have talked about over the years, when he was 8 years old, he was selling lemonade on the street in his neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And his brother Brian said Mark was always a hustler. Mark used to go to Forbes Field. They didn't have money to go to Forbes Field a lot. But Mark, who made all his money off of Yahoo, said, I can't have fans. Fans don't pay the freight. Corporate people do. So Mark wants customers, not fans, as you see him there on Shark Tank. Customers versus fans. This is Mark Cuban telling me this. Customers will spend money for more expensive seats, concessions, parking, merchandise. Fans just want to see a game at as little cost as possible. Owners want customers, not fans. Fans are good. Go sit in front of the TV. We need the eyeballs in front of the TV, and make sure you buy the products that are on TV. Kevin Lowe, who is the general manager of the Edmonton Oilers a few years ago, accidentally let it slip. He was talking about the fan base, and they weren't happy with what was going on because the team was losing. So Kevin, who I've known for a very long time, let it slip. He talked about Tier 1 and Tier 2 fans. Tier 1, being customers who pay a high rate for tickets, they're more important than Tier 2, the average fan, and you gotta please Tier 1. That's Ari Fleischer. And Ari Fleischer and I had a conversation back in around 2008 when he was working for Major League Baseball. It didn't last long with Major League Baseball, but he was working as a consultant with Major League Baseball. And Ari and I had this talk, and Ari said to me, sports need more and more money, and the big rollers had to shell out more money for luxury seating so the average fan could witness a live game once in a while. He was talking about Yankee Stadium, the new Yankee Stadium. At the new Yankee Stadium, for example, they have seats that are very reasonably priced. And then they have seats that are ridiculously overpriced. Well, it's the people who are paying for those overpriced seats that are making the way for the $25 seats. Ari Fleischer told me that in the 2008 interview. Ari Fleischer. We're not friends. I just know him. So there are ways that people bring balance to the game, and they do. Nobody's going to get a ringside seat anymore at a boxing match. I don't know how many people go to boxing matches anymore, but nobody's going to get a ringside seat, a front row seat at a cheap price anymore. That's the way sports has gone with salaries being paid and the way commercial rates go. But there are plenty of seats that are, and that's the balance that every city has to reach. Empty stands in arenas and stadiums this year, COVID-19 in sports. So what's going to happen? What is going to happen? Well, let's go back to Dr. Hughes in Australia. Really, what we need to see over the next few months is how well the rest of the world brings their outbreaks under control. It is not going well in Europe right now. It is not going well in the United States. It is going well in Japan right now. It seems to be going well in Southeast Asia. Japan, because that certainly will make the whole Olympics and Paralympics much more viable. If we see global transmission rates coming under control over the next 4 to 6 months. He said that in September. We may have a vaccine. We may not have a vaccine. Are people going to go back to watching sports in a venue, in an indoor venue? Are people upset with what is going on with protests? Marist College, which is about 65 miles north of me, did a survey recently of sports fans. And they claim that some sports fans, they're talking about the television ratings for the National Football League, which have dropped, that some sports fans refuse to watch the NFL because it's become too political. They refuse to watch the NBA because it's become too political. And yet, if you look at the TV ratings, yes, they're down, but the NFL delivers better TV ratings than anything else. And by the end of this year, when they break down the TV ratings of the top 20 shows in the Nielsen ratings this year, I will guarantee you 19 out of the top 20 shows, 18 of the top 20 shows, because you had the 2 debates with Biden and Trump, which got better ratings. But 18 of the top 20 shows during the fall into the winter will be National Football League games. There's the commish, Adam Silver. Seemed it wasn't too long ago that Adam Silver was going to follow the scientific data, NBA, in an attempt to start the NBA playoffs. Rob Manfred said the same thing, but they changed their tune. Manfred was embarrassed last night. Justin Turner, the Los Angeles Dodgers player, there was some sort of test that indicated positivity on Monday for COVID. But they let him play, even though the test was inconclusive, last night, Tuesday night. In the 8th inning, Justin Turner was pulled from the game because he tested positive for COVID. Okay, he's been around his teammates. He's been around hotel attendants, motel attendants, people that clean rooms. He's been in restaurants in Arlington, Texas. But he was told by Major League Baseball security, do not go on the field if the Dodgers win the World Series. He said no to the protocol and went on the field and celebrated with his teammates, pulled his mask off, and there are pictures of him sitting next to the manager, Dave Roberts. No masks. Major League Baseball is looking into what happened. Major League Baseball avoided a disaster because Game 7 tonight would not have been played if there was a Game 7. Baseball starts in 4 months, spring training in Arizona and in Florida. And there won't be a vaccine available, fully available at that point. What are they going to do? What are the other sports going to do? Now, Silver acknowledged there was a risk putting his players in a bubble, but what else was he going to do? He couldn't guarantee the safety of the players, but he wanted the money. Science lost out. Money won. Manfred, the same thing. He got lucky. There's no Game 7. Manfred said our experts are advising us that we don't need a 14-day quarantine. Back in June, the positive individual will be removed from the group quarantine and contact tracing with the individual and point of care testing with individuals to minimize the chance there's a spread. There will be no parade in Los Angeles. There wasn't going to be a parade in Los Angeles. And instead of the players celebrating their championship in Los Angeles, they're going into isolation. Baseball avoided a major disaster, but has a public relations problem that they have to deal with. Gary Bettman got the NHL through the Toronto and Edmonton bubble, and he got them out right in time because it's spiking in Toronto. The NHL players were tested daily once they entered Toronto, and once they entered Edmonton, they played games. The league probably did around 30,000 tests. Will there be people in the seats? Yeah, there are people in the seats in some places. Indoor arenas, well, that's not going to happen in New York City at Madison Square Garden. That's not happening in New York City at the Metropolitan Opera through at least 2021. That's not happening in Broadway until at least June. In fact, the Westminster Kennel Club that has its annual show, the new Westminster Dog Show, one of my favorite things to watch every February, has backed up their dog show. It's going to be outdoors here in suburban Westchester up at Lyndhurst in June. Hopefully there'll be containment in June. It's just not players in baseball and basketball. There are coaches and managers, referees, umpires, assistant coaches, training staff, and individual people, bus drivers, locker room attendants, TV camera people, people in the truck directing the television action. Some of those people are elderly, over 60 years old, particularly some coaches in the NBA and in Major League Baseball. They may be more susceptible to COVID-19. But without a baseball season, there would have been a $4 billion loss. Now that estimate with the TV is $3 billion. People in the seats? How many? Well, back before the season started with the Big Ten, the athletic director at Iowa State, Jamie Pallard, said that the Cyclones, fans at games, no more than 50% of capacity, meaning no more than 30,000 a game. July tennis, well, there was some July tennis. The World Team Tennis people said that it was going to try and have 500 people at a resort in West Virginia. In 1918, or in 1919, really, the flu pandemic, there was a batter wearing a mask during the flu pandemic of 1919, started in 1918. And the college football season, Georgia Tech, there are people wearing masks. Japan may lose hundreds of millions of dollars if they cannot have the postponed Olympics in 2021, and they have to hold the Olympics in 2021. And if they don't, the games will be canceled. There's also concern about the 2022 Beijing Olympics. And all of this, government and scientists, they're in control, and the money people. France politicians, they're sounding the alarm about 2024, the Olympics. And maybe Paris should rethink the 2024 Olympic plan. In addition to COVID-19, Paris and France are in a recession. The games did proceed. No people in the stands. Television money carried the day. Politics is sports business. That's me, 1995, walking out of a courtroom in Lower Manhattan, following Don Thier, the executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association. 1994-95, Harry Carey and I were supposed to work together on a radio show, but the baseball players went on strike. The show started and ended because the strike had no end in sight. Bill Clinton couldn't solve the issues. He invited them to the White House and threw his hands up in the air because these two warring sides were really warring. The players filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board and ended up in front of a judge, Sotomayor, who's now on the Supreme Court. And I have seen her since then, and we've talked about the decision she made, that the owners were in violation of it just wasn't fair collective bargaining. And she that day said play ball. And years later, when I saw her, we talked about it, she said it was easy, play ball. So sports is governed by a whole bunch of factors, not fans. It's government. David Stern told me all about it. It's government. It's cable TV. It's corporate. Government also includes the courts, politicians, court decisions, internationally as well. Anyway, thank you, Leona, for inviting me. One of my books, The Politics of Sports Business from 2 years ago, Politicians, Business Leaders, Decision Makers, and Policy. And that is how sports operates. Fans, I don't know where fans sit, but that's where they are. Thank you, Leona, for inviting me. And I'm looking forward to returning, I think it's January 26th, to talk more about that Super Bowl.
Exactly, more about the Super Bowl. And there will be a follow-up email to everybody, and I will have that link to Evan's talk included in that follow-up.
And also March, we talk about Title IX, which is now a sports. People think of Title IX, it's all about women's sports, but it wasn't. It was about women getting equal opportunity in education. I'll take some questions.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Please put the questions in the chat box.
Rich,
Rich,
what would David Stern do about Justin Turner? That is a good question because David never threw Donald Sterling out of the NBA. Despite being his racist remarks from 1984 through when David ended in 2014. It's kind of interesting. Adam Silver came in 2014 and threw out Donald Sterling. David also did not censure Jim Dolan, the owner of the Garden, Madison Square Garden, and the New York Knicks, in the Isaiah Thomas sexual harassment charge with Anuka Brown. And a jury found in favor of the Nuka. So he didn't take care of that. He did take care of the road referee, Tim Donaghy, but he had no choice since the FBI was there. David would probably pull Justin aside and probably suspend him for a while. How long? Well, if you remember the riot, so-called riot, the Palace in Detroit, a number of years ago, David tried to suspend a whole bunch of players for the year, and he was shot down by an arbitrator. There are collective bargaining rights that he has to worry about, or would have had to worry about, but he would have tried to suspend them. Anybody else?
I'm looking to see if there are more questions.
Oh, they can unmute their mics if they want to do that.
Unfortunately, because it's a webinar, they can't do that.
Okay, anybody else? Well, I want to thank Leona. I hope you enjoyed my John Madden, Mick Jagger story.
Well, if we're from Chicago, how could we not?
Drake Hotel. Who is that guy? He's Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger, who is he? I ain't got no satisfaction. The kicker on that story, by the way, years later, Mick Jagger signs a deal with, I guess it was ABC, Monday Night Football. And because Mick is the brains of the Rolling Stone, he went to economics school and he signs a deal with ABC to do the opening of the National Football League Monday night game. And Madden comes in one day, he says, hey, did you watch the game the other day? I said, not really. He said, hey, listen, did you see who did? Rolling Stones are doing our opening. And I just started cracking up laughing. I said, John, have you ever listened to I Ain't Got No Satisfaction? What's that? I'll give you another John story. His oldest son, Mike, is turning 16. In Virginia, his wife says, hey, John, Mike is going to learn how to drive soon. And he said, well, Mike, that's like 4 or 5 years, isn't it? She said, no, John, Mike is turning 16. It's going to be me or you that's going to teach him how to drive. So I don't have the picture up here. I'll leave you with one more John Madden story. I don't have the picture in front of me, but my wife, we're at the Arizona Biltmore in 1997, somewhere around there. And there's this big NFL party at the Biltmore. Rupert Murdoch was there, the only time I ever met Rupert Murdoch in my life. And he's there, and all these heavy hitters are there. And John's working for Fox. So John is literally the MC of what's going on there, because Fox is throwing this party. John, and there's synchronized swimmers there. And he's looking up and he's talking to the two women who are the synchronized swimmers. You do this together? Is that what you do? You do this together? you do this together? And I said to John, that's why they're called synchronized swimmers. So anyway, he takes a picture with my wife, and she has black hair in those days. And I wouldn't see John for a couple months after that till football season. This is in March. So I wouldn't see him till September because he was out in California in Pleasanton. And so Gary Bridges is our producer. And I get the picture blown up, which sits downstairs in my living room, as a matter of fact. So I get the picture blown up and I give it to Gary. I said, Gary, why don't you take this out and have John sign it, which John would do for me. And so Gary brings the picture to him, and John looks at the picture and he says, the hell is this? When did I take a picture with Monica Lewinsky? And Gary says to John, put your glasses on. And John puts the glasses on. It's Monica Lewinsky. No, it's Wiener's wife. He said, no, get out of here. It is? She looks just like Monica Lewinsky. Now,
I wonder if Brenda appreciates that. But anyway.
We all laughed at that because Monica Lewinsky was, 20 years younger? And it's one of my favorite stories. I have a lot of stories with Madden over the years. But
you'll save some of those for next time.
Yeah, so, yeah, Monica Lewinsky. Anyway, thank you, Chicago. Thank you, Brookfield Library.
On behalf of the Brookfield Public Library, Evan.
Yeah, thank you.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, we'll do that, and hopefully we'll get Jane over there to give her story about being at the Martin Luther King March on Washington, and I Have a Dream talk. I'll call Jane and make sure that she gets a hold of you. Thank you, Leona, for inviting me. Thank you for being out there. And
yes, thank you, everyone, for attending.
And I'll send you a copy of this if you don't have it. And this way you can put it right through the social media.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Good night.